Get going. Welcome, welcome. Well, I'm really excited for this conversation. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and to be here with one of my favorite people and dearest colleagues, Javin, an amazing scholar and friend, and somebody that I enjoy teaching with so very much. So welcome. Just to reiterate, this is being recorded, and our topic for today is within our series of Sharing Sovereignty, which is a series that is focused on looking at all of the many aspects of sovereignty in our lives. And so we'll talk a little bit about, well, what is sovereignty and what does that even mean? But most specifically today, our topic is food sovereignty. And so we will be using that as our focal point for a discussion of sovereignty today. And so we will welcome discussion and questions. However, I think Javin and I will start off with a little bit of an anchor for the discussion. So in creating this series, Javin and I, we talk about sovereignty all the time. It is the topic of our personal conversations when we get together as friends and want to reminisce, ponder, be philosophers for a moment. And not only that, it's a huge focus in our lives. It is the substance of the lives that we both live in different ways. And for, I think, both Javin and I, one of the most concrete ways that sovereignty is expressed in our lives is through our food. So sovereignty can mean many different things to many different people. And we have covered this in many conversations up until this point with this Sharing Sovereignty series. However, for me, as a very quick snippet of what is sovereignty, it's the ability to understand the many different dynamic influences in our lives and to take responsibility over our lives nonetheless. So it means that if I'm a sovereign person, I am responsible for my relationships. I'm responsible for my behavior. I'm responsible for my food, for my shelter, my clothing. And that doesn't mean nobody else is involved in that. And that doesn't mean, you know, we are an island unto ourselves and completely independent of everything else going on around us. That's impossible. However, it just means that we've accepted that responsibility. We acknowledge it, and we're working towards managing that responsibility in a good way. And there's so much more that could be added to that in terms of just the philosophy and ideas behind sovereignty. But because today we're so focused on food, we thought that perhaps we would share with you a little bit about what sovereignty means to each of us in our lives right now. So what is food sovereignty for each of us in this moment? And we do something very similar in a program that we both teach called Family Food Live, which is a program where we focus on building skills related to sovereignty. And I'm going to share mine, but I'm first going to give the time over to Javin to introduce himself. And I'll introduce myself right before I share a little bit about what food sovereignty means for me right now. So Javin, welcome, and I invite you to take the floor and introduce yourself to our group today.
Thank you so much, Kakisimo. Hey everybody, Jan Radakovich here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. I run a life and land design company. On the land design side, I help people from backyards to 6,500 hectares create more abundant, diverse, and if necessary, profitable landscapes that work with instead of against nature. And on the life design side, I help people to make better decisions by understanding their values instead of being distracted by the shiny things in life, by challenging limiting behaviors, patterns, and beliefs, and to reinvent, recreate, or redirect careers towards regenerative land-based focuses. These conversations we have about sovereignty, and the ones we've had previously, are about all types of sovereignty, about how do we remain sovereign individuals? How are we the creators and the created of our lives? And then how do we apply that in real life? And we wanted to take a moment, because these are open conversations, public conversations, to focus on food. We both focus on food security, which is the ability to have and actually physically have a certain amount of food for a certain amount of time for a certain number of people. So I would say that me and my family are food secure. We have food security for a year. So that's 2 people for a year. That's one way of encapsulating it. Food sovereignty is the ability, when not if, that food security is disrupted. And I'm sure Kakisimo will comment about disruptions that can happen. Um, can we come back? Can we come back from that catastrophe, that issue, that problem? And can we have the relationships, the skills, the resources, and even if the resources are lost, do we have the inherent skills within the individuals that form a group, a family, a community to go out and then build food security again? And this is something that is not commonly taught. A lot of food sovereignty is thought to be, are we sovereign because somebody else is taking care of us? And I think for both of us, that flies in the face of what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is your personal ability to build back your food security when, not if, there is disruption. So I'm really excited to talk about food security today and food sovereignty and answer questions. We've both been at it for a long time, but I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Javin. So yes, I am Kakisimo Isqueo, and also known as Natalie Pepin, and I live here in Northern Alberta, where I run a business called Reskilled Life. And Reskilled Life is dedicated to helping steward and nurture and share traditional skills, skills that our ancestors would have used to enrich their lives, to survive and thrive. And through that, I have specific programming geared at the general public, where we have all kinds of topics related to traditional skills, from hide tanning to making soap, but also, especially these last couple of years, focusing on our ability to manage our food supply, which is something that they took for granted, that it would be the case that you had to know how to manage your food, because it wasn't always readily present in your life, especially where I live, where, my ancestors, the nearest grocery store might have been a 2-day wagon ride to get to. And so managing your food supply for the entire year at a time became very important. It was the survival of your family. Nowadays, we just kind of take for granted the opposite. We take for granted that there will always be food at the grocery store. And in these last 2 years, we've witnessed that that is sometimes not the case. And so we have this paradigm shift back to what was a typical human experience, 2, maybe 3 generations before our time. Those that we come from personally had the skills to manage their food supply. And your presence in this world today is evidence that they were successful at that, because they survived long enough that you should have a chance at life. So we are the living proof and legacy that our ancestors, our families, had these skills. And it didn't take very long for these skills to really just fall away as a matter of convenience. So my goal in what I do and what I teach is to help people reconnect with those traditional skills, those pieces of being human that we have almost forgotten, but not quite. And Javin and I have partnered on programs in the past and are currently partnering on programs to that effect, to share food security skills, how to build up one's food security and work towards food sovereignty. Now, I'll go from my introduction into, well, what does food sovereignty look like for me? And Javin alluded to, there's many things that can affect your food security. So I'll start a little further back, though. I live off-grid, and I have been living here in the Dawatinau or Tawatana Valley in Northern Alberta for the last 6 years. And in that 6 years, I've been growing most of the food that my family eats. This is an important piece of our lives. It's something I've been working towards since I was a little girl. And it's really exciting to be at this place where I've been living this life. However, it comes with challenges. So some of the challenges that it comes with is learning everything that you need to know to grow all the different foods you might want to eat, how to raise the livestock, process the livestock, do it in a food safe way, and manage the appropriate amount of food. So that's what I've been learning for the better part of 20 years and really getting a handle on it the last 6 years. And in that time, many catastrophes have happened. So the first couple of years, my food supply froze. So I love canning. It's just one of my favorite things because it's so convenient. The food is cooked. When you take it out, it is ready to eat in most cases. And it's just my preferred preservation method. And the downside of canning is there's a water content in that food and it can freeze. And so living in Northern Alberta, where we hit minus 45 most years, it presents issues if the power goes out or a door is left open, or in my case, if the furnace or the propane for the furnace gels and then the shed where that furnace is heating freezes up and all your food starts bursting in the jars. So I've had that happen. And you know, one of the beautiful sides of food sovereignty and knowing how much food that I need is I also know what is excess. I know that I can just preserve a little bit extra so that when these things happen, I still have other forms of food to eat. So although I love canning and it's my preferred food storage method, I also have frozen foods. I have dehydrated foods. I have dry good pantry, and I also do cold storage. So there's always been a way to recover from this for the most part. Now, more recently, this spring, almost, is it 4 months, just over 4 months ago, my home burned down. And next to my home was the shed where all of my food was stored. So I had a 14-foot by 16-foot shed where my solar equipment was stored, but also all of my food and water was stored. And when my home burned down very, very quickly, my food all burned with it. So you know, it was really interesting, actually. I sent Javin some pictures afterwards of the carnage. And in the food storage shed, there was some jars that were just like perfectly sealed still, only a few. And now they're not really safe to eat anymore because I don't know if there's anything that has contaminated them, because when a home burns down, it is considered toxic waste. And so I just won't be eating any of that, and it's all been cleaned up now. But what that meant is 90 minutes beforehand, I had enough food to feed my family for between 1 and 2 years. And that was stored, preserved. I grew a lot of it, but it's also dry goods that I'd gather, like rice, pasta, spices, baking powder, yeast, all those other little things that we use that I don't necessarily produce. And so I had a good supply of those foods. And then 90 minutes later, I had none of those foods. I actually had to rely on the goodwill of my friends and family to bring me food because everything was gone. And you know, it's funny because it could have been a lot worse. And I know, you know, I'm not bypassing a horrible traumatic experience, but what I mean by it could have been a lot worse is I might not have known how to rebuild that food quickly. And so over the next 2 months, I was able to prioritize, what do I need? I knew how much my family needed already. I've done that work. I know how much to store for food for my family for a year at a time. And I was also able to prioritize, well, what do I buy first? That's really hard for a lot of people is, well, what do I even need to get? Do I just like start getting pickles and salsa, or should I get jam, or should I freeze a lot of bread? And, you know, having been through that whole prioritization process, I knew exactly what to get first. And I also, because Javin and I really pay attention to what's going on in the world and what's climbing in prices, especially this year, that's been really important. So I also knew, what do I need to go to the grocery store and get right now before it doubles in price? And double in price it did. And so over the 2 months after our house fire, I was able to rebuild a 6-month food supply in 2 months. So 8 weeks. It took me to go and gather all of those things that I needed. And, you know, this is not a pat on the back for me. It's just knowing, having this information, knowing what to do and what to gather. My goodness, that security is incredible. And now I'm working towards a 1-year supply. And for some items, I have a 1-year supply once again. Now we're 4 months later. Some things will take a while to build back. Like I had a 1-year supply of canned butter. So that's expensive. So it's going to take a while for me. I've got a couple pounds of butter in the fridge right now, but it'll take some time for certain items. But what was so comforting to me is I knew where to start. I knew what to get. I knew what it was going to cost me and what supplies I absolutely needed for my family's survival in case our food supply was disrupted immediately. So I knew that macronutrients are number one. Micronutrients come after that. All of the pre and probiotics are considered in there also, but I had that order of operations. And so I am grateful for all the catastrophes that have happened in my life up until this point, micro catastrophes all along the way to prepare me for the big catastrophe, which was very recent in my life, which was losing all of my food all at once. And, you know, it doesn't matter to me what happens in the future. I mean, it matters, but I know that I still have that security. And most importantly, I still have seeds. I still have my gardening equipment. I still have a relationship with this land where I gather berries, wild greens, can harvest meat. And that matters most of all. That sovereignty, that's incredible. So that's what sovereignty means to me right now, and specifically food sovereignty. And I know that, you know, Javin and I, we come from such disparate backgrounds and share such a common passion. And it's always so interesting to hear the different perspective for Javin on all of this comparatively, you know, from a family of 5 living in the boonies in northern Alberta to somebody in a warmer place in British Columbia, and with different life experiences and different values. So I'd really love to hear, Javin, what does food security mean for you right now, or food sovereignty, sorry?
Yeah, thanks so much. So my situation has been different in that I've been an itinerant land designer. So I've been without land for close to 9 to 10 years. And it was only the last couple of years where I was in the same place for a season after a season. I did a lot of living in and on farms and living in urban environments and rural urban environments and suburbs, and developing a food supply that I had near me was difficult because I was constantly on the move, and I carried obviously a lot of books with me as I went around from place to place, so it was hard to also carry food. So instead, what I did is I really focused on the food shed. I focused on the individuals around me when I got to a new place, and I would start to map the food shed. Who are the people who are growing food? Who are the people raising livestock? Who does bulk buying? It seemed to me that wherever I went, there was somebody who organized a bulk buy, and they were always doing a large buy so that way they could get free shipping and then bring it in. And then also, as I started to find these folks, I found a lot of livestock producers. I found people who are raising pigs and chickens and goats and lambs and cows. And generally they were having to do things they didn't want to do, as a lot of livestock and farmers do. They don't like to market. They don't like to market themselves. They don't like to sell to the public. They like to raise animals. They like being the technician of their work. And it was interesting because I created the super secret. I don't remember what I called it. The super secret excellent meat club of Vancouver Island, where I had a couple of great farmers who I loved, and I would create this super secret club and tell people, listen, I've got the in line for good meat, but I don't give it out to anybody. You're gonna have to apply. You're gonna have to tell me why you think you should be part of this club. And it was amazing because it set the bar high for people to come into that food conversation. And then when they became customers of the farmer, and for those of us that farm, or for those of us that buy from farmers, we know buying from a farmer isn't being a grocery store or a customer in a grocery store, where we barely look at the cashier, we barely look at anybody else. We try to get in and out as quickly as possible. It's about building a relationship with somebody. It's about being familial and friendly and remembering who they are and what they're up to and what their kids are doing. So it's a very different conversation when we become people again with those that support and create and supply our food. And so I developed a lot of soft skills when it came to food security. While I was still developing hard skills, I just couldn't apply those hard skills. I wasn't in the same place, so I couldn't grow that garden. Sometimes I would grow the garden and leave the garden and come back to visit. But I'd already started a new one. You go to a new place, you start to put food into the ground. If you do this full time, like Kakisimo and I do, it's what we do. It's in our blood. I don't think I'll see my garden at the end of the year this year due to some life changes. But I sit here going, I need to go plant more because it's inside of me and I know it'll be there for someone. And as we were talking about earlier, there's this old quote, a society grows great when men plant trees in which the shade they will not sit. And I think that applies to food too. Society grows great when we plant seeds for food that we will not eat. We plant it for the soil. We plant it for the wildlife. We plant it for others who will be here. And a lot of friends have said, what are you going to do with your garden? Because you're not going to be here during harvest. I was like, I have friends like you, and I fully expect you to come and raid my garden. I expect you to come and take all the squash and all the potatoes and all the tomatoes. And that I made it for you. And they're like, well, why? Because it's important, because food's important. And we've forgot that. And in North America, I would say more so, in Europe, more so than any place else in the world. But every place else is moving, in lockstep towards forgetting that food comes from soil. Soil must be tended. Animals must be taken care of. And everything comes due. There's always a bill to pay, so to speak. And this is one of the things that we've been talking about a lot. And we're seeing a lot more videos and TikTok videos and Instagram videos about farmers saying, my feed costs have gone up 100 and 200%. Expect the meat to be 100 or 200% more expensive in the fall. And people aren't getting it. They're not understanding that this bill is coming due because of all of the factors. And Kakisimo can talk about them in greater depth than I, and with a lot more personal connection because I don't raise large animals. It's coming due. And there's a lot of those things where the bill is coming. We haven't really felt the large scale costs. And I believe you can believe whatever you want about anthropological biosphere disruption and how that applies to climate. I think a lot of people like to dismiss the whole climate change thing as climate always has changed. And there's a fair bit of good marketing that's been done there to make sure that it is a statement that can be dismissed. But anthropological biosphere disruption is real and alive. We're losing insects up to 80% of what we had not only 40 years ago. We're losing animals and their populations at rate we've never seen before. The swings of our weather patterns are larger in terms of the amount of energy that's in the atmosphere due to both water and carbon and others. It's not just a carbon conversation. And it's good to break the spell of that. Having water vapor in the atmosphere is far more dangerous because of the ability for water to hold heat. And this is where we get things like cloudbursts, where we'll get all of this pressure that comes in from the coast being incredibly infrastructured, will create a warming pattern, a heat island effect. It will create a pressurized system, an aerosolization, so that way the coast doesn't get the same amount of rain it's supposed to. That will pressurize over inland, and you'll get a month or 2 months of rain in a day or a day and a half. It just happened in Calgary, Alberta, where my folks live. They said we're getting all of June and some of July's rain in the next 12 hours. And we're seeing this over and over because there's all that energy. So to bring it back to food security and to bring it back to food sovereignty, there's always going to be something. Doesn't matter what decade or century you live in, there's always going to be something, be it small ice ages, major wars, epidemics, pandemics that have happened throughout the ages. It's always the same. And we like to treat it like it's new and novel, but it's not. And so one of the things about food security is it should be in our bones. It should be, oh yeah, I need to put food away. Why? Because life. Like that should be our response, because life. And what I love is in the tropics, because I've worked in Kenya, Uganda, Cuba, and remotely other places, because of their continuous growing system, they don't usually put food away. They don't have They don't have a habit of doing so outside of indigenous cultures. So Cuba in particular, because of their history, didn't have a habit of putting food away. The special period happens in the early 1990s. The average person loses 20 kilos, 10 to 20 kilos of weight off their personage. And generally they're affected by hurricanes. Well, when you're affected by hurricanes, your food production stops, your ability to produce food production. And hopefully I'm giving you enough examples to go, yeah, there's lots of these crazy events that happen and they disrupt our food. Nassim Nicholas Taleb will call this a black swan, something that is unpredictable, has a huge effect, but afterwards we normalize it, we rationalize it. Oh, of course, yeah, hurricanes, or oh, of course, we should have saw that pandemic coming. Oh, of course, a pandemic and inflation will make it so it'll be hard to get materials. But this is why localization is so important, and localizing your food, be it in your garden, in your area, in your friends, your farmers, your neighbors, is so important. And I'll end with this and then open it back up to Kakisimo. When the major supply issues happened during the pandemic, the dairy cases, the refrigerated dairy cases in our local grocery stores were bare, except for Jersey Land Dairy, because Jersey Land Dairy is an hour drive away. And so Jersey Land Dairy was able to supply this area with dairy. And they were able to do it every single day because they were local. They weren't affected by an 1,000-kilometer, 1,400-mile travel. They were local. And so the inspiration, I think what I'm trying to convey is creating what you can where you are, creating surplus, offering that to others for trade or finance, finding a food production approach or animal or plant that you love and might become some kind of income, some kind of project, is a wonderful way to not just diversify your income, but to diversify you as a person. And Masanobu Fukuoka, who created the no-dig revolution out of Japan, and who wrote the One Straw Revolution, which should be required reading for everybody on the planet, in my opinion, had this to say, that agriculture isn't the cultivation of land, it's the perfection of the person, it's the perfection of humanity, because it brings us into our surroundings in a way that nothing else can. Kakisimo or others, thoughts, questions, queries? We're definitely into the conversational part of this Zoom conversation. So
Yeah, I would issue a question to everybody, which would be, what have you noticed in regards to food security in your region? We're not necessarily all in the same places. And that's one of the beauties of these discussions, is we can share from a diverse of experience and also context physically. So what do you notice in terms of your access to food over the last 2 years, whether it's pricing, availability, preferences even, or your own efforts? So I'll open that up to everybody else before I pick up on any other points.
Okay. In my case, because I live on an island, I think the last couple of years have been a huge wake-up call, not just for me, but also for a lot of people living on this island, just how vulnerable we are. So not only are we dealing with we're at the receiving end of the same type of shocks and stresses that has hit a lot of people during COVID. Now we've had some major weather-related shocks in British Columbia that has affected a lot of the food production. And then we have, the war in Ukraine right now that is also having a massive impact on a lot of the grains that are really being supplied to this region as well. So our grain production in BC was disrupted last year. Now, the supply we could get from Ukraine is being disrupted as well. But I think living on an island, you just realize that not only are you are vulnerable to the nth degree, because they're getting things to an island is even more complicated than if you're living on the mainland. But what has been really surprising to me is that there are people on this island that don't get it. And that's probably the biggest shock I see. I work in a retail store in town right now, and people, come in and they kind of marvel over increasing prices and lack of stock. And I'm like, what planet are you on? So I completely agree with both you and Javan that what you're doing here, it is a fundamental conversation that needs to be spread far and wide, because we have gotten, I say we as in general, have gotten so completely disconnected from where our food supply comes. So that was one observation I've had. But the second observation is that also living on an island, I'm surrounded by some fantastic people who do get it. And what is really neat to see is how they are starting to enhance the food shed that Javan was referring to. They're building more community, and they're starting to realize like, hey, I'm not an island. So yes, I have certain livestock, but I don't have all of it. So I think we are moving within this community. We're moving more and more towards a kind of a barter economy. And we are starting to not just talk about production, but much more about storage. What do we do with whatever we're producing on the island? Because in Salt Spring, we used to supply a boatload of food to Vancouver Island, but right now, the island itself, we are only producing 10% of what is being consumed on this island. The rest is coming from outside. And that's absurd, because that number should be 70%. So you have these two kind of disparate groups of people, where one is completely in the dark about what's going on, whereas the other one is really rising to the occasion and saying, we have a responsibility, not just towards ourselves, but if we actually team up, we can. You were talking about sovereignty. To me, it has a lot to do with resilience, that we can enhance not our own respective resilience, but our community resilience, if we start having a conversation about who does what, and then we pool our resources. So that's the really neat thing to be part of.
Hi. Well, I'm sorry for my English, but I will try to do my best. Well, before the pandemic, I was working in a farm producing horticultural plants, and we began to have a small orchard to cultivate many vegetables. And I was always interested to many edible food and no conventional food, and to experiment and to cook and to have all this knowledge, and from one day all stopped. We were closed for 3 months, and our company closed too. We didn't have the money to pay all the people, and we had the capacity to can feed 36 people for the 3 months, because this orchard and all people could make in the land, to work together to produce and to feed all the families. And every week the people come and take what they want. And this was so good, to connect the people around the work, the food, and this knowledge, and many workers were not so connected with the food production, but my boss and I, we know the importance of that. I am lucky because my grandmother was always a woman of the countryside. Can I say it like that? Yes. And she had coffee and sugar cane in every place of her small farm. Wait, I try to organize my think. Every place of her small farm have a piece for a special plant, and she produced in every corner of the place. And this was so nice, she was in the window looking, and she know every place of every plant, and this was so inspiring for me. This was what connect me with these things, you know, and that all my generation, like Kakissimo say, was connected with that. My dad came to the city, and I always live in the city, but I always connected with that, speaking with my grandmother and trying to get all the feeling for her, for the land. And this was so nice. And yes, I was so happy when we could feed all these people for the 3 months where we will close it. And yes, and you know, the people were not at the beginning, um, you know, I like to crop different things like pereskia and different plants, and they say, oh yes, you can eat it. And the people, I don't, I will not eat that. Why? I don't like it. Oh, come home and I will cook for you and you will try. Yes, this thing to try to change the thinking of the people was so nice. Yes, to feel how the people say, ah, yes, you was right. This is so nice. I will try it, and to inspire them to grow in their homes and to give a small plant. Oh, take it. Yes, you can do it in your home. It's not so hard. You can begin. This was so nice this time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you know, that's a really good point that I love picking up on. I teach a lot about wild plants too. And often that mentality that people have around, well, I can't eat that. That's not food because it's not something they're accustomed to seeing at the grocery store. It's such a paradigm shift that is involved not only in tending to our food security and building food sovereignty, but also coming to understand what is food. What does food mean to me? What is the order of operations of what I need to tend to? So for me, nutrition for my family, top priority. I need to keep my kids alive and healthy. That, as a parent, that's what I'm looking to do. And so when I look at that, what food is through that lens, I begin to have so many options around me beyond the foods that I'm even growing. I have nettles and lamb's quarters and dandelions and shepherd's purse, which is a member of the mustard or brassica family and tastes like cabbage when you cook it. So there's just so many things that are just growing all over the place, and you can just go pick them and eat them because you know what? They're nutritious. They fill your belly. And so that mental shift is often the hardest part around developing food security. You know, I was a single mom with 4 children when I first really started taking my family's food security really seriously and began to actually assemble and gather and have food on hand. Because there were disruptions to my work. Sometimes things would happen in life and I just wasn't able to work for a period of time, but I still could feed my family. And the hardest part for me wasn't just having the money. And I would have said at that time that that was the hardest part. But in the end, it actually wasn't. I learned how to do it properly. It was the paradigm shift of, you know what? I didn't have to buy fish sticks at the grocery store. That was completely unnecessary. It was a waste of my money. It was something convenient, which for a single mom is really nice, but changing my mentality around the foods that I was gathering and how I was going about it, that was the hardest part for sure. You know, allocating an extra $25 on each grocery bill and, you know, taking off the convenience items for a week and purchasing a staple in large quantity was how I did it. It's how I got to this point where I am. And one of the things that Javin and I are always doing is, well, what value can we add to our community? You know, what can we offer? Although we teach about developing food security and building food sovereignty skills, our personal goal is that people should be food secure and people should be developing food sovereignty, and they should be reaching towards those new skills. And I remember last year, you know, when things were really intense with the lack of food and just the rising prices, and people who were already food insecure were becoming more so. I remember telling Javin, like, I feel horrible, because here we are with this knowledge of how to go about doing this and the practice ourselves. And it feels like we need to do something about this. And we ended up for this year setting a goal of reaching 10,000 people and working directly to support 1,000 to build their own personal food security. And so that's what these events of sharing sovereignty and many of the webinars that we've done and the tools we've been developing and putting out to the world is to help us meet that personal goal of just, you know, 10,000 people are more aware of food security and 1,000 have taken steps towards building their food security. So one of the things that we both wanted to contribute today is we've developed resources and PDFs and worksheets and handouts and all kinds of things that we can offer to everyone. And so Javin has one to offer and I have one to offer, and it is a bit of a synopsis of some of the work that we do. And so we're going to put those in the chat for those who are here, but we'll also make these available for those who are not here live, but are perhaps watching this down the road. And talking about those basic skills that we take to build food security in our lives. So I mentioned when I was a single mom, I'd spend an extra $25 every grocery bill by removing the things that were convenience items that we did not need. They were just comfort foods, and taking that $25 and putting it towards those important food staples in bulk quantities. So my first was a big bag of rice, and that bag of rice lasted me a year. And then the next was bulk beans, because we put beans in soups and things like that. So it was looking at those staples and just adding it into my normal, you know, grocery store purchasing. So one of those tools that I've made is a food storage purchasing schedule. So if somebody wanted to build up a 3-month food supply in 8 to 10 weeks, how would you do that? What would you buy? In what order should you buy it? And, you know, what's the most important thing to buy? And what combination of things would equal $25? There's also a column where it's $50 if you want to spend just a little bit more and do this faster and maybe build up to a 6-month food supply. Then what could you spend that $50 a week on? And so I have this handout that we'll be offering to everybody. And on the second page of this, or it might be the third page, there's also a list of, well, how much food does somebody need? And so Javin's handout has this and mine has this, because let me tell you, we've both made mistakes on what we have stored. We have stored things we never used because it was just, you know, haphazard, pulling together. Well, what could I put together? What could I store? One time I canned the wrong kind of apricots. And let me tell you, I don't like apricots very much at the best of times. And when you can a type of apricots that is not meant for canning, they taste horrible. Horrible. Like I fed them to the pigs eventually because I'd hung on to them for 2 years and I was just like, I can't eat these. They're so bad. They were bitter and just, ugh. So, you know, we've made those mistakes and we've come to understand that it's easy to store things that you don't need, or to store a quantity that you're going to end up giving away because it was just so much, or to not have enough of certain things on hand. You know, at the start of the pandemic, when there was lockdowns, I know that there were definitely people who were thinking, oh gosh, I don't have enough food for the number of people who are currently staying in my home full time, because everybody came home from university, everybody came home from school. People are not working away right now. They're not eating lunch out at work right now. And so the food in the home is not enough. So that list also tells us, well, per person, how much food would you need to survive on? And one of those things that's important to me is survival is first. Whenever I'm prioritizing, it's what will allow me to survive, and then what will allow me to have health and vitality, not just survival. So we want to survive, but also thrive. And then what will make my life beautiful, tasty, exciting, add variety so my kids don't complain as much, because let me tell you, that gets old fast. So when I'm working on food sovereignty or food storage, I go in that order. It's survival, so that's macronutrients, it's carbohydrates, it's fats, it's proteins. And so those are incredibly important. And then also, of course, water. And then I add in all of those other pieces, the vitamins, minerals, the prebiotics, probiotics, all of those pieces I begin to assemble also. And then I go for taste. I grab spices and herbs and, those slightly non-essential things like frozen cherries, So that's what those handouts are about. And then Javin, I'll pass it back to you to explain a little bit about this. And why I'm bringing this up is, we can talk about where things are headed and how things are. Javin mentioned feed costs. My feed costs have gone up 300%. And, I was paying $85 a bale for a bale of hay for my sheep 3 months ago. And now I am facing the reality of $275 to $300 a bale for a bale of hay to feed my sheep. I can nearly not afford to raise sheep right now. Now, luckily, that's my food supply. It's not just my income. I need that meat. So I will continue to buy that. But I'm creating new opportunities for my sheep to forage in my yard because let me tell you, every day I don't have to feed hay is money in my pocket right now. And so, these hay shortages, they've been coming for a long time, and we've experienced them repeatedly over the last 5 years. But when I started, I paid $35 for a bale of hay. That's the price for hay when I started farming 6 years ago. And it's been going up steadily since then. And it's hit 300 multiple times in that last 6 years. And that's because of drought. That's because of winter kill. Our winter weather is volatile. Sometimes we don't get any snow for the winter, and that creates issues for those perennial plants. It kills them off because they're exposed to the cold. They're not insulated by snow here anymore. One year we had 60% winter kill for those legume forage crops, which meant that they would not be ready really to harvest the next year. They were just being seeded again. So what this does is it drives the price up because there's less hay available for the number of people seeking it. And, those rules of supply and demand, they're harsh. I was lucky that I had somebody who didn't raise the price of my hay to that, but I did end up paying $150 at times, but he's just not able to supply me this year because he doesn't have enough. So it'll be a really interesting year for that reason. But we also have drought that has been occurring for years where I live, and it's becoming more and more volatile, the drought. This is a heavy rain year. If we're able to bale hay and get the crops off at the end of the year, it'll be a fantastic year in that regards because we have enough moisture. But most years over the last 10 years, we have had drought, and the quantity of crops of grains produced has been decreasing by 40 to 60% a year. So this is cumulative. So it drops 40% one year, and then the next year it drops another 50%, and then the next year another 40%. So the cumulative drop is staggering when it comes to wheat production especially. So changes in food costs are inevitable. Like Javin said, there's no way for them to not change. We've been cushioned for a long time because of trading partners around the world, but our trading partners, they're having problems too right now. And so it's creating very interesting scenarios for us. So I said I'd pass it over to Javin, and I could literally continue on forever with this topic. So I'm going to pass it back to Javin now. And yeah, we'll hear a little bit more from that amazing man.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind giving me permission to share a screen, I'd like to just show folks a bit of the document that I've shared with folks. It's a document I put together for the first time. I was you are now the host. Awesome, thank you. For my first conversation in about 2.5 years since COVID hit. And there's a group of folks whom we're meeting regularly, anywhere from 80 to 160 people. And they're meeting because they want to become a bit more reliant on themselves. And I just love that conversation. And one of the things that folks said after the talk, it was about an hour and a bit, was I love that you started from a principles approach. You didn't just start with, okay, go do this and then do this, but what's the principle? And so I wanted to share a little bit of some of these principles because I think these principles help when building anything. And the first one, and this is for me within life design, if you don't design your life, it'll be designed for you for somebody else's benefit. And we were all designed to get our food from a grocery store. From the moment we were raised, we went to the grocery store, unless we had people who were actively growing their own food. And generally those people were demonized or thought to be, oh yeah, you're crazy grandmother, you're crazy aunt. They're still living in the Great Depression. My aunt loved to stock up. And everyone would say, oh, she's waiting for the apocalypse. But the apocalypse or no, we always had food that was somewhere in the order of 30 to 40% cheaper than if you were just buying every single week. And I think that was something that was really important for me to learn at a young age. And to realize that it's always a good time to redesign the way you look at food. There's always a good opportunity to take a look at that and think about that. The other thing that I think Kakisimo and I have talked about a lot is start where you are with what you have. So whoever's around you, whatever you have, whatever your current interests are with food, start there. Start to stock up on the things you love to eat that are also good for you. I'm not saying this is an opportunity to stock up on 2 years of mac and cheese. Eventually, if that's a comfort food, that's okay. But really to start with that idea of nutrition. One of the things that I do a lot in life and land design is to set my bar laughably low. Okay, so this month I'm going to have, 1 extra can up on the shelf, or by the end of these 3 months, I'm going to have 1 extra bag of rice, to make it so low that you have to laugh at yourself and go, I could do that. The reason for that is that the moment we have a bigger goal that seems like it's going to take a lot of work, life gets in the way and makes it so it feels like we'll never get there. This idea of small and slow solutions as well is really important, to take things slowly, to take high successes. When I start with clients, when we're working on designing food and making their yards into food production conversations, we always start with mint. Why? Because it's really easy to make your own year's supply of mint tea. Grab 4-inch pots from the local nursery. Make sure you plant them in 1 or 5 gallon pots. Don't plant them live because they'll run everywhere. 2 or 3 times a year, cut them, dry them. You've got your own mint tea. You were able to complete that conversation and now you've got it. And that's what we all need. We need these small little steps that make us go forward. We all learn from mistakes. They just don't have to be our own. And I'm so grateful to have people like Kakisimo in my life because I've learned from her mistakes so I don't have to make them. Unfortunately, I'm still that guy that's like, well, I want to learn for myself. And so I've made the same mistakes sometimes that she has graciously told me, you don't have to do it that way, but sometimes we just have to stub our toes to know. We've talked about this already. Black swans will happen regardless. But the other thing is, build a new food sovereignty skill every year. I was speaking to this group, and somebody in this group I spoke to a little bit previously. And she said, it's just so much work to make a garden. I don't have a lot of space. It just doesn't make a lot of sense from an efficiency standpoint. And that's one of those arguments that modern society uses. It just doesn't make sense. Well, the thing about food sovereignty is that when you need the skill of how to germinate a seed and plant a seed and tend to plant is not the time to be learning that skill. The time to be learning that skill is before you need it. I do a lot of work in forest fire, resiliency and design. And the time to know where to go when a forest fire hit is not when it's coming towards you and the electricity is cut. Time to know where to go is before that moment happens. So designing for issue, designing for black swans is really important. Something we do in our family food security programs is we celebrate our successes and we share and learn from our mistakes. And we both do it. This beautiful dog that just came up to me and I gave a pet She dug up the majority of my potatoes this year, which lets me know everything in my body that was saying, you should put a fence up around the potatoes this year. She kind of was around them last year. Should have done it. So we learn as time comes on. And I think this is something important that we've learned over and over. 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Have backups. Redundancy is a beautiful word. It's okay to have food in several places in your home or even on your property, because fire can happen, as we've learned. But also, it allows you to remind yourself that when calamity happens, it tends to be localized in location. So if you have a bit of food at somebody else's house, if you have somebody else you've invested in, if you continue to keep your relationship with farmers and growers in the area, there's always going to be a little bit more you can focus upon. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Anybody want to comment on any of those principles or general first principles?
Well, only to say that I find it super inspiring. I've seen them before from participating in the family food security class, but it's always good to be reminded. And I think the more I personally get into my food security journey and expand on my own learning and the learning, oops, and growing more and more food, I'm starting to realize just how profound this all is. It's just, I've said this to the two of you before, but it's just been such a massive wake-up call for me. And I think especially this year, I'm now in year 3 where on my learning curve in terms of growing food actively. And I'm finally at a point where it doesn't all feel like good luck when something is succeeding. I'm starting to realize that, I'm starting to get the hang of this. It's not all accidental. And it's because of people who are a lot more skilled than me that I'm learning from and who are so willing to teach. As you were saying, but because I'm not only just learning from the successes, but I'm also learning from the mistakes. And then I'm realizing that people who are not as far along as I am, are learning from my mistakes because I'm sharing with family, I'm sharing with friends. And what has been so beautiful is to see how some of my friends who have never grown food before are starting to really pay attention to what's going on. And I find it super flattering when they reach out to me. It's like, can you help us out with this? And then I'm still at the point where I guide them to other resources because I feel like, okay, I'm a bit humble about my own skill level still, but it's it's a fantastic journey. And it's that notion of taking charge of your own life and your own well-being and your family's well-being, and also contributing to something around you in terms of the community that resonates so deeply with me. And it goes without saying I'm preaching to the converted, but I'm also starting to really embrace the fact that the food sovereignty isn't just about food. It's a much, much, much larger conversation that needs to be had because you start seeing, I studied political science and history for my grad program. So I'm used to looking at broader trends and seeing how you have cause effect and all that. But that's not something people generally do. A lot of people don't. And I think that opening that door for people, food is a really good way of doing it because food is something that is so fundamental for all of us. And when you start realizing that you can't have a conversation about food in isolation, but that it's something that is related to a much, much bigger picture, that's when you start seeing some real shifts. And this year in particular, Kakisamo, I just want to tell you that I am paying so much more attention to learning about medicinal plants and foraging and learning from the ones of you that are light years ahead of me and finding such great joy in eating things I've never eaten before that I'm picking off my land. And things I didn't even cultivate and grow there, I'm realizing there's abundance around me that I can eat. and it's also teaching me to then encourage the growing conditions for that, right? So that I help it, you know, into even greater abundance on the land. So it's an amazing journey. It's a very joyful one, but it's also one that's grounded in a dire acknowledge of necessity, because yeah, shit is going to hit the fan massively. It already is in certain places. We just haven't really seen the full impact of it yet. So that was a long conversation, long answer. You guys are not the only ones to talk. I can do it too, but yeah, very inspiring. Great principles.
Well, I wanted to comment that not all the plants have read all the books. Then you can work with the plants, and you can begin to experimentate and change the conditions, give a good environment, and they react. Some plants have lost the capacity, you know, but when you get the proper seed, or you cultivate it, it begin to react. And I was surprised last year. A worker spilled some seed of lentils on the land in a so wet land, and we have some plants of lentils, and oh, how could be lentils here? This is almost impossible. But the land was so good, and I begin to think, oh, what's that? Why these plants are reacting here? This is amazing for me, and I understand that we can begin to work with the relation between plants, and to try to connect this to the feeling of it's a inside feeling that, you know, that this place will be good for this plant. She will be happy here, and this was so nice for me. And yes, I understand that we are like working and constructing something with them, and it's a relation, you know.
Well, and I just want to say, I think it's so beautiful that you're referring to the plant as she. I know that there might be a bit of a language issue, but still, I think we should all do that.
Yes, the plants are my friends, you know. I care for each one, and I know I try to know and to say, oh, she is with flowers, she is happy, to feel who is each plant.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's agricultura.
Yes, yes. This is it's a feeling, you know, that you are part of all.
Beautiful. Dine, I love what you had to say there. And watching your journey, and watching your photos, and watching everything bloom literally has just been inspiring on my end as well, because it took me a long time to get good with growing food, and I would probably say I still have a long way to go, because there's always mistakes, and there's always conversations, and as Juan was saying, sometimes you don't listen and the plant doesn't go in the right place, and it goes out too early or too late, or there's all of these pieces. I'm finally starting to listen to the wisdom of this Italian mentor who was like, when the soil temperature is 21 degrees, then you can put the tomatoes out. Before then, don't try it. Don't even muck about. And I love what you had to say about being very connected and understanding about where you're at. And there's a humbleness that comes from this that I think petroleum has given up. There's a beautiful book back here someplace called The Energy of Slaves that goes into the amount of entitlement is directly correlated with the amount of petroleum and the access of what that petroleum gives a culture. So the more a society doesn't have to chop wood and carry water and actively put in the labor that produces their basic needs, the more entitled they are. And the more entitled they are, the less humble they are when it comes to food. And there's a sense of, well, why are the shelves empty? And it takes us back to a moment to realize no one ever made a promise to you that they would be full. I was never born. Somebody's like, by the way, we promise food will always be on the shelves. I think our parents naively would say, I'll always make sure you're fed. And for those of us that have gone through moments where financial means weren't there for us, that has wavered. There's been times where food hasn't been as consistent. And this is what I love about studying ecology. So this is kind of taking a step outside of just food security and sovereignty. What I love about studying ecology is that ecology doesn't care about your feelings. Ecology doesn't care that you want a latte. Ecology doesn't care if tonight you would love to have X, Y, or Z. Ecology doesn't care. And this conversation about agriculture, in many ways, a Faustian bargain, because, and I think Indigenous individuals and those with connections know this, agriculture tied you to a piece of land and a way of living that wasn't as free as hunting and gathering was. And we know this pretty conclusively. And Yuval Harari's 2 books, Sapiens, were recently transposed into a graphic novel. And I've been loving reading this graphic novel because the way they've drawn wheat is they've drawn a Faustian devil wheat, talking about those poor sapiens. Sometimes I almost feel remorseful. They work so hard. They think my side of the bargain is to spare them from hunger and disease. Ha ha, stupid apes. My gift is to instead give them famine and chronic health issues. Rather than improve quality of life, the agricultural revolution there has produced a population explosion. Yes, farming brought them a lot of food. And it goes on to talk about when we started to domesticate animals and domesticate all plants, and we stopped being in relation with so many of the creator's gifts and so many of our plant relations, we slowly moved ourselves into a Faustian bargain that didn't necessarily produce bigger, better, and brighter humans. By all measures, it produced smaller, dumber, and weaker people. And this is what I think we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about, and we've been talking about it in these conversations, about the Overton window. What's outside of the Overton window is what's outside permissible conversation. And for me, being involved with agriculture, basically saying agriculture isn't the best thing for us to be doing for food is definitely outside of what you would expect somebody to say. You wouldn't expect somebody to say, oh, this is what I do. And it's probably not the best thing. And I've had a conversation like this with a lot of my colleagues. Once you understand what's happening, a lot of us say, I wonder if we are being disingenuous by not telling our clients, you sure you don't want to be nomadic with what's to come? You sure you don't want to be so embedded into this house you've built or this shed or greenhouse you've built? And we've joked because in many ways we don't know what's coming. But when you take a look at the 12 to 14,000 years we have been agriculturalists compared to the 250,000 years we've been Homo sapiens and the 2.5 million years we've been hominids, only 14,000 years we've been agriculturalists. The rest of that time, nomads. The rest of that time, nomads. That doesn't mean we didn't cultivate. That doesn't mean when we were eating something delicious, we didn't purposely put it on the side of the road or the side of the path and plant it. There's lots of proof that shows that we did. But we survived by being nomadic, by moving when moving was smart. And this is one of those things when we get to food security and food sovereignty that I don't think anybody's talking about because it's a tough conversation to have. So I'm going to throw that little spicy bean into the mix and see what somebody else does with it because we only have a few minutes left.
It's always a fun.
Go ahead, Nat. Yeah, go ahead, Kakisha.
Go ahead, Kim.
No, it's like I find this so provocative, and because I realize that it's hitting me right at the core. It's like 3 years ago, I built the first real home I've had in many, many years after being a nomad for many, many, many years. And the connection, and I think Kakizimo, you and I could have a conversation about belongings, right? Because I tried being a Buddhist student and all that, I tried to have this non-attachment to things, but I realized that it's not just this physical attachment I have. There's like a deep emotional connection to the land that I'm on right now, that I feel that I'm stewarding, and this sense of home and placement and whatever. So for me to go back to being a nomad, I know I could live in a lot of different conditions, and in that way I'm very resilient. But cutting that connection, that love I feel to this place, and that complete utter daily joy I see from things changing around me, and observing and cultivating discernment, and that would be so hard for me to do at this point. It really would. And it's a fascinating conversation, but it provokes me, because I think, no, I don't want that.
And I just want to add before I pass it over, this isn't me saying a truth. This is me saying, this is a really fascinating line of thinking that I'm picking up and looking at and turning around and pondering. And I'm not here to lay down a truth in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to make sure that was clear, because I'm not here to judge anybody's way of living. But I want to look at the big picture and go, that's really interesting. Let's talk about that. That feels juicy and makes everybody squirm in their chairs. That's fun.
And, to pick up on those threads, living the nomadic life, my people, my nation were considered buffalo hunters. We followed the buffalo. And so that took us down south, it took us west, it took us right around home too. But we also always came back to the same places in different seasons, because we did have a home. We did plant gardens. We did have that relationship with land, but just multiple little pockets of land where we went every year. And sometimes we'd, skip a year, and we didn't need to go specifically to that same place year after year. But that relationship is the important part. When we were talking in this first conversation that we hosted about, well, what is sovereignty? I talked about my perspective on sovereignty, that it's about relationship, and that it's about relationship with each other, and, good relationship, not just relationship in terms of I interact with others, or I interact with food, or I interact with the land, but that I interact in a way that is responsible. I interact in a good way. And that relationship with the land is critical. And so, for me, being from what we would consider very recently in my family nomadic roots, my great-great-grandmother followed that same fur trade existence, where she processed animal hides and moved around a lot. She was born in Fort Benton, Montana, in a trading post community. So that's very recent in my family. It's not many generations ago that we were the modern definition of nomadic people, but we had ties to the land. And I experienced that same drive still to be in different places in different seasons. This is the first time I have been rooted in one place for a long period of time. I always, if I was in a place for a year, I got antsy, had to leave again. But having been in this place for many years now and gotten to know it, I see the value of that home base, which we always had. We always came back to a home base where we knew the plants, we knew where the blueberries in that small patch of forest were, and we knew where the soil was right. We had planted squash seeds in certain places, and those plants would thrive in that place. So that relationship, it's so critical. And I really feel like that's sovereignty. Relationships within our food shed, relationships with a specific plot of land where we have grown food, relationships with each other, where we can plan for each other's food needs and be able to respond to those. So, you know, talking about should we move back to being nomadic, it's funny because I was just telling Javin in a conversation we were having earlier today that I had a goal of increasing the proportion of my family's food that comes from wild sources this year. And it just so happens that that's exactly what's happening. Most of what I have stored so far this year is wild foods. So wild greens, wild teas, wild roots, and pretty soon wild berries will be on the list, and I'm going to go harvest some cattails right away. So all of these are wild food sources, and for the first half of the year, I'm eating nothing but wild food sources towards my food security. And it's only when things are ready to harvest in my garden, which where I live in a northern climate isn't till like the last month of summer. So that's August. We really have an abundance of anything to harvest. It's, you know, that proposition of should we be telling people to relate to the land in a different way once again? Yeah, we should be doing both. We really should be doing both. That's where real security is, because sometimes, as Javin has experienced, locusts eat everything, literally just all of it, it's gone. And so then wild food becomes some of the only food that makes it past their mouths. And so that's our option for that year. So it's not that we shouldn't plant gardens. I'll continue planting a garden for as long as I have the ability to, but I will also continue to forage for wild foods for as long as I have the ability to, because security and sovereignty comes from both spaces. So should we be telling people, go be nomadic? Yes. Should we be telling people to plant a garden? Of course. Do both. Have a home base, but get to know the space around you and travel through that landscape and find the foods in that landscape. Absolutely. So that's where I would take that conversation, Javin. It's both, not one or the other. Wonderful. Oh, I really appreciate, you know, the richness of conversation and everything that's been added to this conversation. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'm curious, are there any burning questions that are on people's minds? Or if there are no questions that come up for you, I would ask a question to you, which is, what is the next step in building food security and building food sovereignty for yourself and your family?
I can start. I think the last 2 years have been really interesting in terms of what's coming at us. It's primarily from a climate point of view. Last year we had, exactly a year ago, we had this dramatic heat dome here in British Columbia that just cooked everything. And then this year it has been exceedingly cold and wet. So it's like kind of going from one extreme to another. And one of the things that's really gotten me thinking about is we need to probably, or I would like to become better at using my greenhouse. And I would like to, so that in other words, that I buy more time instead of depending, you know, exceedingly on the outside. Because as long as I have a greenhouse, I can kind of, I have a little bit more control of what the temperatures and conditions in that greenhouse than I can do on the outside. And it will give me a little bit more security, because I've seen seedlings die and I couldn't get things in the ground quick enough. And it's just the volatility that's coming at us really hit home this year for me. And I've had a lot of people saying, oh, you know, this has been really hard to grow this and this and this year. And it's like, yeah, there's a reason for that. So I might be wrong, but as I see it, I think we need to get much better at creating some environments that are not as dependable on the outside weather as we seem to be these days. So in other words, I want to get much better at growing seedlings, start seeds from inside, and, you know, through undergrow lights and all that. But really learning how to utilize my greenhouse a lot better than I did this year. I'm getting better, but it's about organizing it properly. It's about maybe doing some additional insulation of it so I can use it even earlier. Yeah, just really getting more control on where I don't feel so kind of at the receiving end or the mercy of what's happening from a weather point of view. That's one thing. And then the foraging. I'm just dying. It's like a whole new world that has opened up to me. And the first time, I didn't even tell my husband I put some of the wild foods I'd harvested in the salad. And he was like, "Oh, this is really good." I was like, "Mm-hmm." So, but it was so funny to see his facial expression when I told him what it actually was he was eating. It's like, "Oh, okay." So it's yeah, it's an amazing journey, and I love every minute of it. So thank you for that.
Well, now I am totally dependent of my work. All the food that I could get is from the land from my boss, and I am thinking to own my own land to crop. And now I am thinking to improve the relation with the seeds. These people that care the native seeds, to improve the relation with them, to can crop different things. I always like the idea to have something to get food always. And yes, I never have the problem with the climate like you. I don't need to store food for the winter. And I think that to create relation with the people around the farm of my boss, to interchange food. I like the mentality of the old times when my grandmother always was sharing what she had with the neighbors. And this was so nice because you always have this protection of the community around. I think to create this relation in is so nice for me. And now I am thinking to to can get enough money to own my land, and yes, to plan how will be or how to construct this project.
Well, thank you to both of you for those sharings. And as we wrap up and leave on a high note of what our plans are and what we're excited for the future, Javin, I have the same question for you, and any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
I would just say I'm really buoyed and pleased that folks joined us for the conversation tonight. We love talking about this. This builds us up. This is the great thing about sovereignty, is the more responsibility you take for the things that you need to stay alive, the stronger you get as a person. And it's not a vanity strength. It's not a strength that you can walk on the beach. It's not a strength that you can walk in front of other people or drive by other people. It's a strength that beats from within your heart, and dare I say within your spirit, that drives you. It brings about a conversation within you that produces character and produces more connection to other beings on this planet. And I'm just grateful that everyone decided to spend some time tonight talking about this subject, and I hope it was of value. We will be posting this conversation, so if there's interest to share it, it will be posted, and we'll put that in the Facebook link for folks to share out. And just my undying gratitude to Kakisumo. Your example, your inspiration, your beingness, I so appreciate. And very blessed to have you in my life as a friend and a colleague, and as a traveling troubadour through this incredible life of ours. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Javin. You know, it's just so everybody knows, it's a rare experience in life to have a friend over such a long period of time who I can relate to in so many beautiful ways, but also have big audacious goals that we share in our work and get to work towards that common goal together. And so I'm so grateful for that, and to be able to witness this journey for you, but also to be benefited by your journey as we share together and learn together. And again, thank you to everybody here who's watching down the road, also for giving us some of your time to have this conversation. It's just so important to us, and clearly it's important to you also. And we hope that, you know, whatever you take from this, whatever it is that your food security journey looks like, and reaching towards those food sovereignty skills looks like, that you find a way that works for you, that regardless of where you are, there is a way to build food security and food sovereignty. And your context, your living arrangements, your work arrangements, your family context, there is an option and a path for you in building a better life through your food and through those connections. So I encourage you, think about what that is and take steps, even just tiny little steps every day, and make use of the resources that are being offered, both through us and through many, many, many others. And I hope for the absolute best for the growing season if you are growing a garden, and for all the skills that you're learning. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic evening. I have some lamb's quarters leaves to pull off their stems and put into bags. So I'm going to go tend to that now, and I look forward to an opportunity to chat again soon. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.